Thank you. Before I start, I'll just do a little advertising. My business cards are up there. And I do the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which perhaps some of you, how many of you have ever done the indicator, had it done? Wow, great. Okay, good. Anyway, it's there. If you're interested afterwards, have a card. Now, since I like to roam in ideas, I thought it would be good to start with a summary of the main topics that I'll be exploring in the talk with you. The first one is natural and artificial organization and order, specifically the human organism and libraries. Personal organizational systems, specifically the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and something called the Keirsey Temperament theory. And social change in the West in terms of mental disease, disorder, and lastly, the genius or ruling pattern unique to each person, which we may learn to engage and enact. I'll be calling on a number of quotations of other writers, especially my favorite, Michel de Montaigne, the French writer of the 1500s. He's got a very warm way of putting things, and I think we can use his fire's glow and warmth. Before I get into my talk, as befits the seriousness of the themes, I thought I'd like to give you all a brief personality test. Now, this is called, perhaps some of you have heard of this one, the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. This is the updated one, 1988, done by Mr. Albert Rosen, PhD, no less, of course. Other than the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, this is the only one that I use in my practice. Now, since we have little time, I'll just read you a few of the questions, and you can answer them to yourselves, true or false. This should give us a good start, and so if you're ready, here's the question. Oh, by the way, breathe deeply, as they say. Relax, answer to yourself as honestly as you can, all right? 1, I am easily awakened by the firing of cannons. 2, I believe I am following others. 3, I was not very strict with my parents. 4, my sex life is satisfactory except when I am with another person. 5, sometimes I feel that things are real. Real problem, that person. I believe that my home life is as miserable as that of most people I know. Must have made a mistake. 7, I frequently notice that I am not trembling. 8, I am liked by most people unless they know me. And 9, I get happy easily and then get over it soon. And finally 10, I think I would like the work of a robot. Now, I think that's probably enough to give you a sense of how seriously I want you to take my talk. By the way, the send-up of a real MMPI comes from a book called The Primal Whimper. And I recommend it to any psychologists or students of psychology that tend to take themselves too seriously. I always tell myself, I talk to myself quite frequently, and I'm proof of being an intellectual ass often enough, that serious rhymes with deleterious and delirious. As Maria Dressler, and don't ask me who she is, she may work for Stefan for all I know, she said, quote, learn to take life seriously, but never ourselves. That's a pretty good motto for me. Since I have less than an hour to try and tell you about personality type and temperament, what I call TNT, my distinctive or idiosyncratic dynamite combination of the two, which is really too short a time to give you a sample, even taste of what I consider really a fulfilling banquet that TNT is. My purpose now is to just make you your being and not just your mouth water, right, for the real thing. I hope that some of the themes I'm going to touch on will summon you to do one thing, and that is to learn for yourself. To pursue self-knowledge to become the genius that you are. For as Montaigne says, we are all patchwork, and so shapeless and diverse in composition that each bit, each moment, plays its own game. And there is as much difference between us and ourselves as there is between us and others. Consider it a great thing to play the part of one single man. As persons who work in a university library in whatever capacity, I trust it is not as a robot, though at times you may feel, and quite legitimately, like a leper. Permit me an aside here. The etymology of library is as follows, which perhaps some of you know. The word comes from libra, the Latin, which means book, but originally it actually meant the inside bark of a tree. From that came a text that was written on that, and then a collection of leaves for writing. Then finally came our concept of the book from that. The Latin word for leper actually means to scale off, to peel off. So all of you that go home of a night after a difficult day, it's all right to feel like a leper because etymologically it's in keeping with your job. Anyway, to get back to my stated theme of organization, what you do or are associated with in working in your library is managing information, which is what I would call the process of simply making sense. That is, you literally, excuse the pun, make, intentionally arrange and organize sense as data. What you do with and to your books, CDs, etc., within your library system is just what you do to yourselves. That is, as individuals, you organize sense data into personally meaningful and sometimes not so meaningful order. The motivation for your acting as managers of data, both in your library and as individual persons, is to make sense of the world, whether as books or your own life. The point I'm making here is that each of you is organized in a unique, idiosyncratic way, which only you can know and learn. Each of you, in effect, I think, is a library of various volumes of specialized history. And these volumes are also, by the way, self-help books. As Montaigne says, let us only listen. We tell ourselves all we most need. But if it were only that easy to locate and read our own self-help book, unfortunately, it's not so easy. It is if things go right with us in our genes and our upbringing, but unfortunately, there are reasons why. In fact, reason, with a capital R itself, is the reason. More and more in modern times, we don't grow normally, naturally. I won't go into the reasons here except to say that because of them we have become profoundly disconnected from our biological and our social life, which has resulted in a disruption of our normal growth process, which we see as the diseased culture that we have currently in the West, that's at odds with itself. Interesting thing about Montaigne, even in the 1500s, he saw this discordance in his own life. There was nothing so beautiful and legitimate as to play the man well and properly. No knowledge so hard to acquire as the knowledge of how to live this life well and naturally. The most barbarous of our maladies is to despise our being. Consider the evidence for this epidemic in the West of our despising our being. In the U.S. Epidemiological Catchment Area Study, as it's called, of 18,000 people in 5 representative areas of the United States recently done, and I quote this, about 1/3 of the adult U.S. population currently has or at some time has had a significant psychological disorder, most typically involving anxiety, depression, or substance abuse, 1/3. But let's leave disease behind for the moment and return to how we are organized, keeping in mind that disease is in fact nothing but disorder or disorganization. The problem is then, how do we organize ourselves as persons? How do we make sense of our world? Within your library, you use, at least for your books so far as I'm aware, two systems of classification, the Dewey Decimal and the Library of Congress classification. Is that so? Yeah? Yeah? I get an A on that one? Yeah? All right. As an aside, I love the names of the other two classification methods, the bliss and the colon, implying one is either in heaven or in the bowels of hell. These classification systems allow you to define and relate all the different books according to certain rules of organization or classification, so as to make sense of them, to order them. Now, obviously, some ways of ordering things, books or people, are better than others. Imagine what would happen if books were simply classified by the shape of their covers, that is, by the size or the color, rather than the content. Such a way of ordering would not be very helpful. The homily that you can tell a book by its cover obviously applies to human beings. And Montaigne is very good here. He says, a sound intellect will refuse to judge men simply by their outward actions. We must probe inside and discover what springs set men in motion. Yet this is just what people tend to do. They judge one another by very limited organizational and classification systems. They introduce much error into their judgments. And people are so very different and inconsistent. It is certainly tempting to believe that there is no reliable pattern in personality, and there's no way to make sense out of the human chaos. I wonder how many of us have thought about that. My God, for a minute there, it suddenly all made sense. Actually, if you know type, this is a very good picture of my type, which is an INTJ. We're just always, oh yeah, it's there. I understand the whole thing. You get a little bit, well, you can see with the guy. So, as Montaigne knew, nothing is harder for me than to believe in men's consistency, nothing easier than to believe in their inconsistency. We do not go, we are carried away like floating objects, now gently, now violently, according as the water is angry or calm. What we would like to find are classification systems that pertain to personality in objective and useful ways. Montaigne knew the difficulty. Those who make a practice of comparing human actions are never so perplexed as when they try to see them whole and in a single light. For they commonly contradict each other so strangely that it seems impossible that they could have come from the same shop. I believe we have two of those systems in type and temperament. I believe that they can give us what Montaigne meant when he said, if any man could prescribe and establish definite laws and a definite organization in his head, we should see shining throughout his life an evenness of habits, an order, and an infallible relation between his principles and his practice. So let me give you just a brief sniff at the hearty repast of type and temperament. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator represents over 50 years of research and application. It's currently the world's most widely used instrument for understanding personality differences. Over 3 million indicators were administered 2 years ago in the United States in 1 year. It's been translated into many languages and is most popular, other than the States, actually in Japan, interestingly enough. The corporations use it quite a bit over there. Type theory posits 16 different personality categories. David Keirsey, an American psychologist, his temperament theory uses 4 different personality categories. He developed his theory from the ancient 4 humors of the Greeks, the 4 temperaments there. And these 4 basic personality types, perhaps a little different rendition of them, but this will give you an idea of, outside of Keirsey, but, well, what have we here? Oh, the four percent. The glass is half full, the glass is half empty. Half full, no wait, half empty, no half. What was the question? Hey, I ordered a cheeseburger. When did these slip in? Actually, these are fairly indicative of the temperaments, too. I won't go into that, but yeah, that's a good one. Anyway, so there we are. Now, the Greeks, the four humors, I don't know if you know about them, the phlegmatic, the sanguine, the choleric, the melancholic. Keirsey developed them into a theory that jibed with Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And here's just an overall graph picture of the development of that. See, yeah, there we go. The four temperaments as they evolve into the 16 types at the top. Give you a little idea of the structure and the coherence of the two different systems itself. Now, these theories work from the point of view that you are born with a certain orientation or predisposition to life. While there is a range of difference within that orientation, the range is limited. The analogy I use is that of a group of different size rubber bands. Obviously, the different size bands can be stretched to varying lengths without breaking or permanently stretching out of shape. But the range of each size band's amount of stretch obviously differs according to its size. You cannot stretch a certain size beyond its set limit without damaging it. Likewise, your type of personality. You have a certain range of response and behavioral possibilities within which you operate normally and best. To try and go beyond that range or not utilize the performance available within that range is both destructive and wasteful of the individual. What type and temperament gives you is the ability to usefully order or organize personality differences in a way that can make a great deal of sense to you, both publicly and privately, in your work, home, in your relationships. Type and temperament, TNT, help you find a predictable pattern in personality differences. These theories are based on empirical evidence, all right? Observable behavior. They are not created out of arcane, mythical entities like the collective unconscious. What type and temperament are pointing to is how individuals, you, are organized. How you are organized, I would argue, is who you are. Once you come to understand your own type, you can become aware of how different you are from other types. Many of us, I don't think, appreciate the huge difference between types, and I mean huge. It's difficult for us to escape what I call the insularity of ourselves, that socially learned self. We tend to make judgments, particularly of others, obviously, on emotional, automatic, habitual, almost unconscious